Okay.
Raz.
This one working?
Raz,
No.
dwa.
That one working? Hello? Hello? You are the executive director, is that correct?
Yeah.
I'm going to say EMCD.
Raz.
Okay, oops. Yes. Yeah, I've been told. Yeah.
Trzy.
Okay, everybody, if you could take your seats, we'll get the next session going. Be great if everyone could take their seats. Thank you. Okay. Hey, Jamie. Good man, are you? All right? No, it's good, Good. Okay. Can you take your seats, please, everybody? Thank you. Okay, so while people are taking their seats, I'll get the next session started. Can people hear me at the back? Yeah? Okay. So this next session is European Policy Dialogue session. And I'll just explain the session before I introduce the keynote presentation. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Now, this session, This session will address the European drug policy situation in the EU and the neighbouring countries and discuss trends, challenges and advocacy needs. Alexis Goosdeel, Director of EUDA, will provide an overview of the current European drug trends and developments and set the scene for a panel discussion with experts consisting of national and European policy and decision makers, civil society and community members. The panel discussion will focus on different topics, including new drug trends and developments in the EU and neighbouring countries, harm reduction in Europe, European policies, impact on harm reduction and an evidence-based drug policy, the shrinking space for civil society, and advocacy priorities and needs. There, I just read that so you'd all calm down. There we go. Nice and peaceful. Lovely. So without further ado, I will introduce you to Alexis Goosdeel, Director of EUDA, who's going to give a keynote presentation. So we'll begin. After Alexis has done his presentation, Alexis will step down, our panel will step up, and we'll get into the discussion. So over to you, my friend.
Thank you, Tony. Dzień dobry, Warsaw. And you know what they say when there is a meeting of the therapeutic communities? They start saying, good morning, family. So, hello, family. If I can have the first slide. So what I will try to do, first I would like to thank and to congratulate Correlations. Happy birthday. I want also to remind some of you that there is another birthday this year. That's the year when Poland and other countries joined the EU. And that's a very important birthday. I had the privilege to exchange a few words with President Kwaśniewski, because I think we are also at a critical moment in Europe. I will speak about some of our challenges, but certainly one of the challenges is, I think, it's time for us to reactualize, reset, restart what was the enthusiasm for all those countries to join the EU. I think on the one hand, when I speak about this special moment 20 years ago, many friends say, well, now we are Europe. So there is nothing new, and certainly Poland and many other countries, they achieved a very long journey to the point that Poland is now a country where people are emigrating. They are not emigrating from Poland, they are coming back or they are going to Poland, which is a very important example. Still, I believe it's a very important moment for us to think about where do we stand in Europe, and when we are in the European Union, what are we standing for? So, the first thing, the starting point, if we want to briefly go through the main challenges and opportunities for harm reduction in Europe today, I think the important is to remember or to acknowledge that if we want to look at the drug situation in Europe today, there are three words that characterize it, which is everything, everywhere, everything, and everyone. Everywhere, because drugs today are everywhere in Europe. There was never so many drugs and substances reaching Europe or being produced in Europe. The second thing is that what goes together is the fact that everything today, more than before, is used or can be used or be the object of addictive behavior. And this goes much beyond the former division between hard drugs, soft drugs, licit or illicit, of vegetal or chemical origin. And one phenomenon that started 30 years ago, but is much more complex today than ever before, is polysubstance use. And then, as a consequence, is the fact that everyone is confronted personally or indirectly to, especially if we include alcohol and medicines, everyone can be confronted with the acute or chronic problem of addiction. And this has also many consequences, including what is one of my first ideas or messages I want to share with you, is that it's time to reinvent our own definition of addictions, and it's therefore also time to reinvent what we mean by harm reduction. Because all those new substance uses, those new substances and the increased and more complex polysubstance use means that what is at stake is new risk behaviors. And as we are at the harm reduction conference today, for me it's important to suggest that we go back to one of the old ideas 30 years ago, 35 years ago, which is that in the French-speaking world, where it's not difficult to guess I'm coming from, given my accent in English, we talked about risk behavior. And risk behavior encompasses much more things than just harmful consequences. And I think if we want to reset, if we want to have a reinvention, and if we want to promote and defend harm reduction, we need to update the definition, and for that we need to think about the new harms coming from the new ways and the new substances, but we need also to be more broader, including risk behaviors. And also, I think it's once more an opportunity for me to say it's time to update and to forget the old model that is until today, or implicit theory, as we call them in psychology, is the heroin epidemic. Today, it's much broader, it's more complex, so time for change. I'm really tired to see discussions about needle exchange or OSTs 30 years or 40 years after they were initiated, because the problem today is not only about OSTs or needle exchange. And they are not the answer for everything. So we need new answers. But we have something that has become now the #1 problem for the citizens in Europe, and also for the decision makers, which is drug-related violence. And this is why, as the new European Union Drugs Agency, last week, we organized the first European conference on drug-related violence in Brussels. I'm very proud of the work of my colleagues, because for the first time we organized a conference on drug-related violence, but also for the first time we did it in a way that was multidisciplinary and that was talking about all forms of violence for everyone, from people using drugs to the citizens, to everyone. This is why it was not only about law enforcement, it was also about women and drugs, gender and drugs, the situation in prisons, violence to people who are using drugs, violence from the services. And I want, of course, to thank the people who shared their experience about the situation in Poland, because you had some illustrations of those various forms of violence. So for me, the key for the EUDA, as it was already for EMCDDA, is really to avoid to be trapped into the polarization of the society and the situation that we observe every day in the political discourse, and to go to a more integrative way. And this is why the motto of the conference last week, and we are continuing to work on it in the coming year and years, it's break the cycle, build our future. What are the key moments, what are the key opportunities and challenges we can highlight if we talk about the situation in Europe? Well, I have only 2 minutes for this slide, so very briefly, next year we will complete the evaluation, the external evaluation of the EU strategy on drugs. The Polish presidency will play a key role in drafting, together with the member states and in dialogue with the Commission and the Parliament, the new strategy with the support of EUDA. And then this will have to be translated in the European Action Plan. And certainly there is a lot of things to say, but even more to do to improve the situation and further develop harm reduction, taken into account in a more integrated way, and I will come back to this point. But we have also something that started this year, the change of the European Parliament. Congratulations, former Commissioner. That's great to have you back and to have you at the European Parliament with us. But we have a new Commission since 2 days ago, Sunday, which means that we need to start again the process of informing the different parliamentary committees about what is the situation, about what are the needs. And we have a big challenge, is that the third and the fourth political groups in size and importance in the European Parliament today is the far right. Therefore, it's clear that the work for all of us in the EU sphere will be more challenging than it was before, and we need to join forces for that. There is also, and there was a reference made to this morning, there is the evolution the last 4 or 5 years. We are slowly, but unfortunately, I'm afraid, surely going towards a less democratic Europe. We have half the member states that have either a far-right party or a populistic party in the government, or even in France that is kind of controlling the government from the outside. And today or tomorrow, the French government may fall as it is prisoner of this situation. But they're not the only ones. And the result from the elections last weekend in Romania show huge increase. They tripled, the far right has tripled its score compared with the previous election. So there is a challenge, because if we don't pay attention and if we don't try to redefine and reinvent our role, I think there is a risk for all of us to lose all the benefit of the past 30 years of European drug policy, starting not only, but with harm reduction and participation of people with lived experience. So it's a real danger we have in front of us. And again, we need to join forces to anticipate. And I wanted to mention also that we also have opportunities. There is the Global Alliance Against Synthetic Drugs that was launched by the US. Of course, with the change of administration, we may expect that there may be changes for the continuation and the follow-up of the global action and the global coalition. This is why I addressed a call to action to the European Parliament in September on synthetic drugs. And we had the Polish colleagues who showed the difficulties about naloxone. And part of my call to action to the Parliament, which we will continue to repeat everywhere we can, is that it's good to have member states to discuss about synthetic drugs. It's good for the member states to be afraid, but if they were doing something, it would be even better. We have too many countries who have not yet legislation for the provision of naloxone, and our message, taking this as an example, is if you wait until you have an epidemic with fentanyl or nitazines, it will be too late to start sitting around the table to discuss legislation. We need to move forward. Now, the challenge, if I summarize what I presented to you until now, is I was 2-3 years ago, I believed, and I was saying that we were at a tipping point. And I think the expression is not valid anymore, because at that time I was believing, hoping that the improvements, because we and you face a huge number of challenges in every country, in every city where you work. But if we look at other parts of the world, still we have a few things that are some good results and we want to keep, and they want to kill. So here the point is, what can we do? And the difficulty that I see is that there is a risk for all of us. The risk is to let the far right or populist politicians to present themselves as the only ones who care about the safety of the citizens, and to have the others, harm reduction, LGBT, all those who are the expression of diversity and difference, to be treated like the new woke and to be excluded from the discussion. So I think for us, the point is harm reduction is not the new woke, but we need to be aware of the risk and we need to do everything we can to avoid being treated like the new woke. This would be the perfect excuse to eradicate everything that was done in some countries in the last 20 years. Instead, and that's one of the points, one of the edges of the conference last week in Brussels, what we insist is the importance to support and to strengthen our communities and the resiliency of the communities. It's through community development, it's through community prevention, it's also community policing. And again, that's one of the points on which last week we saw that there was a lot of room for looking differently at the things and some very interesting experiences. And as I see, we have a colleague also from Canada. I had an official visit to Canada 2 months ago. And one thing I found interesting, I want to share with you for further reflection today is we visited the drug consumption room in Montreal. And actually, without the consumption room being the cause, there is a concentration of homeless and people in the neighborhood. It's not only in Montreal, there are plenty of places in Europe where it happens. The interesting thing is that the citizens, they are complaining because it's not safe for them. But they are not, so far, they are not complaining and asking to close the DCR. And the colleagues from the DCR, they explained that they are not the cause. And I say, yes, but not to be the cause is not enough. You need to be part, not alone, but you need to find different ways to be part of the solution. Because the risk, and I know that there is a discussion in Brussels, in Liège, in Belgium, for instance, and in other places, again, it's taken as an argument to close the drug consumption room, while we know that they have nothing to do with the problem, or the problem of which they are accused. Still, we need to find a way to push for participative and collective solutions and make sure that we don't let false expectations being raised regarding the drug consumption rooms. So this means that for me, it's time, for the reasons I explained with you, to you now, I think it's time for us to reinvent harm reduction. And I had some interesting exchanges the last weeks, and yesterday also with Catherine, we were discussing, yes, but there are people in countries, they really do not apply really harm reduction. And for me, it's not a surprise. I'm together with some colleagues, I'm one of the founders of harm reduction in Belgium 35 years ago. And I always found that part of the declarations of the politicians when they were saying, we have integrated harm reduction, sorry, it's just BS. That's not true. It's not because you finally accept to have a needle exchange and to have some substitution treatment programs that you have integrated the logic of harm reduction. That's wrong. And the problem that we face today is the same. And those who know me or follow me or meet me, you know that I say very frequently, for me, it's harm reduction. The first step, it's about recognizing and supporting what is sometimes the little bit remaining part of humanity in each of the people who are using drugs, who can be sometimes in a very bad situation. For me, the fact that when someone is entering in one program of harm reduction, they will say, here Theokostakis, Theodora, how are you doing today? That's the first thing, to recognize the part of humankind in the other. That's the starting point. And that's the starting point, and not first the kind of substance being used. And I think the work you do, and you know, it's not, it's really what I strongly believe. When I visit your programs everywhere in Europe and outside, what I really find admirable, and I really praise you and your work for that, is that each of you, at your level, you help to maintain or to restore this part of humankind. That's what we should be striving for, but we need to update our approach. So, I'm supposed to have finished, so I will go very quickly on this part. That's not the most important for today. The most important is harm reduction. So, we have changed, we have moved this year. We are in the middle of our metamorphosis, moving from EMCDDA to EUDA. And please don't call us EUDA. We are not Judas Iscariotes. It's EUDA. So our new mission is EU preparedness on drugs. I will spare you the details because this is something you can read. But I want to read you what is our manifesto, because this is our commitment to you and to the community, and this is my conclusion for today. Today, and that's the manifesto of EUDA. Today, drugs can take on many shapes and forms. They permeate society, accessible to anyone, anywhere. That's where we step in. The EUDA, your European Union Drugs Agency. Our mission is to monitor drug trends, alert on emerging threats, share science-based knowledge, and learn from you and for you to develop robust responses. Your lived experiences inspires our work. With over 100 experts from across Europe, we believe in our collective ability to address drug issues and strengthen EU preparedness, engaging with partners for change. Vigilance is our watchword. Our data will be your tool for shaping effective policies and field programs. Our alerts will be your signals for quick and decisive action. Our recommendations will help boost the impact of your work. EUDA, we stand with you, acting today, anticipating tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alexis. Thank you. Excellent presentation, as always. I'll invite the panel members to join me now up on the stage. That would be great, thank you. and I'll introduce everybody in a moment. It's very clear from Katrine's comments earlier this morning around the around frustrations. They're running high, and Alexis describing the potential of loss of 30 years of work in our current policy environment. So we're going to get into a very cosy debate with 7 members of the panel, all of which are not shy at speaking up, which is great. So I won't have any problems getting people to say things. Who we have here today is Member of Parliament Vinis Andriukaitis, Dennis Huber, Pompidou Group, Council of Europe, Senator Lynn Ruane, parliamentarian from Ireland, Victor Marovacic, did I say that right, Victor? I hope I did. Victoria Timoshevska from Health Solutions Foundation, Ukraine, Lynn Jeffries, Euroinput, and Peter Sorosi, EU Civil Society Forum representative. So, thank you. So, my first question is to our MEP. I'm just going to invite you to reflect on the presentation that Alexis has just given and offer some insights, the biggest challenges in the forthcoming years based on your specific knowledge and expertise. There's a microphone there, and I've been asked to ask people to speak up for the translation, and I'm to slow down as well. So here we go. Over to you for a moment.
Dzień dobry. Dzień dobry. Warszawa. Ja troszeczkę rozmawiam po polsku, rozumiem po polsku, ale nie tak to bardzo ładnie. Hello everybody. I think we have good opportunity now to develop our discussions. And starting, trying to answer your question, let me first of all say that I have in my hands very nice booklet which was built by Central European, Central Asian Drug Commission. You know, we have here towards effective and humane drug policies in Eastern and Central European and Central Asian countries. And I see some main points, and those points still are valid after your presentation. Of course, because we are just speaking about main issues of the human rights problems. And you just mentioned situation in European Parliament where you see some far rights are going into direction, denying human rights. But my question is for our societies, why people are voting in favor? Because you see now the third biggest political group in the European Parliament, patriots. They are calling patriots. Patriotism also is. I hate such behavioral challenge. I am patriot. No, you are not patriots. You are fighting against humanism and against real patriotism, because human rights require what? Love and possibilities to develop our own action based on human rights. But now you see that we will have a lot of challenges when we can promote new harm reduction approaches, new things. It means that we need to absolutely have a real clear picture. We need to fight now, to fight once again with those who are denying harm reduction, who are going into the direction war on drugs, the same direction as it was done 40 years before. It is a very challenging time. It's up to us now to say in which direction Europe should go, because everyone is a voter in this room. It is for me, it's a challenging issue. It's a behavioral issue. How we behave, keeping in mind human rights. It's up to us now to discuss in broadest context, because now I can respond to program, to EU Drug Program 2025. Yes, we need to have strong parliamentary debates about that. And you just mentioned very important issue. I was the first commissioner who visited your center in Lisbon in 2013.
32 years.
In 32 years. And after me, nobody came to you. It means that at Commission level, we need to think, yes, at Commission level, they are not capable to visit agency and to organize much more efforts, inviting also member states and discussing issues by how it is important now to understand, because it is so challenging time. How many refugees do we have now from Ukraine in the EU? About 6 million. About 60 million. How many of them are suffering with HIV, tuberculosis, and so on, hepatitis C? And of course, it's up to us to answer those issues. And it means that sometimes they can go into direction to use drugs and to be violated. And of course, also speaking about accession countries, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia. Now in Georgia is mess. A real mess. You need to think, well, what can we do? But generally speaking, when I argue about those countries, Moldova, Lithuania, Georgia, Ukraine, I know that some background in behavior is Soviet time background. Law enforcement, you know, the imprisonment, punishment, those stereotypes remain, and those far rights are using the same instruments. And in Russia is against harm reduction. It's absolutely. And it means that influence into our societies is a very big one. And challenges you see now in European Parliament, far rights, they argue in the same mentality as it was in the time of Soviet oppression. I was, dissident. I was fighter against Soviet totalitarianism. I was imprisoned. It doesn't matter. But I am strongly believe in possibilities to join our progressive forces and to encourage all of us to understand that harm reduction is basic question about possibilities to cultivate human rights in our societies, including all LGBTs, including all vulnerables, including all drug users. It's about situation with how we are cultivating human rights in everyday situation, in Polish parliament, in Lithuanian parliament, everywhere. Sorry, being a little bit emotional because, the topic is very close to my heart.
I think that deserves a round of applause. What a fantastic speech. Thank you. And you managed to touch on a number of things that I was going to ask you about already. But I would ask you one question around that you mentioned already, just to ask you around how EU can facilitate drug policy reforms for candidate countries. You mentioned that in terms of the process of EU accession, Ukraine, Moldova, Balkans. What can we do?
It should be included in our negotiation, documents. It should be included not only in chapter of public health, but also it should be included in chapter of rule of law, human rights, and we can see more holistic approach when we're debating issues with candidate countries. Doesn't matter Western Balkans or Eastern neighbors, Ukraine, Moldova. It is absolutely. For me, it's crystal clear. Before the war in Ukraine, such a position to include, human rights was not so high on agenda. Now, as never before, we need to raise those questions. We need to include into our negotiation chapters issues, but holistically, human rights, public health risks, or possibilities to organize healthcare systems which should be ready to respond, and of course, financial means. We need to understand now. Under-financing of those issues is so huge problem. In Lithuania, in Poland, just we listened to our friends here in previous panel. For me, it's clear. In Poland, you see that it is underfinanced, such situation. And we need to also think about, when we are speaking about multi-annual financial framework, so we need to include also issues about financing, additional financing of those means. Otherwise, member states have no chance to provide additional money to solve the problems. And of course, let's raise questions about cost, about economic cost of those huge problems, because a lot of people do not understand how it is harmful to their economy, to their societal needs, and of course also possibilities to spend money when we are going into very big harm. We need to be more preventative, but prevention requires financial support.
Thank you. So funding is key to the foresight that we have in terms of the risks that are coming towards us with regards to synthetic drugs and such. So on that point, I'm going to open it up now to the rest of the panel with a question. How can we promote and advocate for more effectively for harm reduction in Europe and ensure that drug policy is based on evidence rather than ideology? Victor wants to come in.
If I may, hello everybody. I would like to reflect to what has been said already and to what Alexis presented, yeah, and also to move the discussion a bit forward. Yeah, human rights is essential, right? Essential also in what we do in substance-related policies. Let's call it like that. We can't sufficiently preserve, promote, deal with human rights issues under current paradigm of drug policy, under this prohibitive paradigm of what we do in terms of other substances than alcohol and nicotine and tobacco. Yeah? So we have to overcome this paradigm to effectively deal also with human rights, but also other issues. Alexis mentioned there is a time to rethink harm reduction. It's not only about what the harms are and what are the interventions to reduce the harm in terms of technical or things like of the interventions. We think about this in Czech Republic very much for a long time. Harm reduction became an integral part of Czech drug policy, and moreover, harm reduction is and should be, and this is also the challenge for EU and global drug policy in future, the main objective of substance-related policy or drug policy. Objective and the measurement against which we measure our success. Yeah, so not only part of the drug policy, it should be ultimate objective principle of what we do. And then we have a chance to overcome this paradigm and to put also people in the center of policies, as we say, properly.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Victor. I know, well, actually, Lynn Rowan wanted to come. This is great. Hands are going up. Lynn Rowan, the Irish parliamentarian, wants to come in quick, not quickly, as long as...
Are you putting a time bound at me there, did you?
I did.
Okay. Thank you. I think the presentation was interesting because it's always interesting when the people on the same side of you end up kind of triggering you somewhat, because we're all kind of moving towards the same goals. But when I seen the image, I suppose, of not gun-related violence, drug-related violence, and this kind of stereotypical, person in a hood, and it's like, and then we're talking about community development, and we're talking about harm reduction, but then we're stereotyping where drug-related violence actually stems from and the core drivers of that. And I think if we're going to rethink harm reduction, we need to understand very intimately that those people who are being depicted in a particular way are part of that conversation. So when we put them in a particular light or vilify or demonise, we're actually ignoring the core drivers of both violence and addiction and drug dealing itself, which is usually shame, humiliation, not being able to meet one's economic needs, growing up in poverty, experiencing harm, being close to violence. Being close to violence means that you're going to be more likely to either die by violence or to take someone else's life by violence. So harm reduction has to extend to them small percentage of people who are often causing the most harm in communities, but have also lived very particular lives. And I think that that's what we need to do when we talk about rethinking. But when we also talk then about the challenging of the far right, we also need to remember that many of us are being governed by neoliberal politicians who are seen as really advanced outside of their own country, when actually the experience of people in their country is that it's the status quo that has refused us decriminalisation. It's the status quo that hasn't made naloxone over the counter in our countries. It's not the far right have done that. They may be provoking a particular feeling in society of anger, but it's the current system that has failed us. So we need to stand against the current system. But the problem is, we are the current system and power protects itself. And unless we're willing to actually challenge ourselves and our peers, you know, and maybe replace the guy with the gun with, I don't know, a white politician in a suit, you know, well then maybe that's where the real conversations and changes can happen. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. As clear as ever. Remember we said you have to slow down. Would have it? Right. So now, Dennis, you want to come in?
Yes, thank you. It's a very passionate debate. I like it. Of course, I'm only a grey civil servant, so maybe the temperature will slow down a little bit. Harm reduction is an integral part of a human rights-based policy. And as executive secretary of the Pompidou Group, we, of course, defend a human rights-based policy. You know probably that the Council of Europe is the organization in Europe which is defending democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. And based on the mandate of both the Council of Europe and the Pompidou Group, we have recently adopted, the Pompidou Group member states, a policy paper on aligning drug policies with human rights. There is no EU regulation on human rights and drug policy. There is no Council of Europe convention. The countries are sovereign in adopting their drug policies, but they have human rights obligations. So what we are looking at is to which extent drug policies may be contradictory with human rights obligations. And this is the purpose of this policy paper, is to highlight the rights which exist and which should be protected and which should also be part of any drug policy. And there is a specific reference to the right of prevention, treatment, and harm reduction in this document. And among the policy objectives, there is the following paragraph, which I read. Evidence-based risk and harm reduction is grounded in justice, public health, and human rights. It focuses on positive change and on working with people without judgment, coercion, discrimination, or requiring that they stop using drugs as a precondition of support. It must be implemented in order to prevent correlated diseases or greater harm, such as overdoses, and put people with addictions in contact with healthcare services. Harm reduction improves not only the health of people who use drugs and those with substance use disorder or addiction behaviors, but also that of their families, the immediate environment, and society in general, and is based on a strong commitment to human rights. So this is the paragraph dealing with human rights in this policy paper. And if you ask me if I really believe that someday we will have human rights-based policies, I will reply, you may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday everyone will join us. I know you already joined us. And the world will live as one.
Very good, thank you. There is there's a party tomorrow evening, and apparently we're going to have a sing-song. Now, I'd want to bring Peter, actually. Can I bring you in, Peter, from Hungary? And it's been mentioned there around, far-right politics and neoliberalism and such. And obviously, Hungary has a very particular situation. How does the current political climate, the increasing populist and extreme right movement, influence the development and implementation of evidence and human rights-based drug policies? We've discussed that. But what can we do? What more can we do? Just want to ask you that, if there's any, three on the spot.
Thanks. Difficult question. I come from a country where harm reduction is a taboo right now. So most of the large harm reduction programs were closed down. So when I joined this movement 20 years ago, it was Alexis mentioned that Poland and Hungary, they joined the EU in 2004. And at that time, we believed that we are just ahead of big changes, and we will make harm reduction mainstream and acceptable, and fill the gap between Western and Eastern Europe. What happened is just the opposite. I think the gap is just bigger than ever, I believe that what we also need to do is change the narrative around harm reduction. I mean, what Alexis said about reinventing harm reduction is quite important, and also what Victor said, that we cannot just avoid the policy dimensions of harm reduction. So we usually keep this discussion within public health and speaking about needles and HIV. But for example, if we speak about drug-related crime, we should tell that most of the crime is not drug-related, but it's related to the system of a bad system, and how we are creating violence through policies. So that's one thing, and also I also think that changing the narrative in a way that we don't only speak about needles but people, and not just what's wrong with people, like you have HIV, how to reduce overdoses, but what happened to you and how you get here. And I'm a filmmaker, so we're doing movies, and that's what we try to do, to tell the human stories behind all this suffering which is caused by the human rights violations.
Thanks, Peter. Funnily enough, I was going to ask Victoria to come in on this from the Ukrainian perspective.
I will bring the story about Ukraine, and I am very grateful for you to referring to over 6 million of Ukrainians who had fled the war. I would like to bring the attention to over 1.5 million people who are deployed into defense forces and security forces who are right on the battlefield protecting Ukrainians, but literally protecting Europe. And besides their strength and inability to think that they can leave the battlefield, there is a huge threat of drug use. And it's not a threat. We already have a preliminary data that between 30 to 40% of these people are actually forced by the circumstances they are in because of the absence of support to acute war trauma due to health injuries and physical injuries that they suffer. They have to self-medicate often, and Ukraine will definitely need to rethink its drug policy. While there are forces who talk about that they need to be more stringent and strict because of the wartime and a lot of the legislation that gets everything under control. At the same time, we understand that as a country, we will not be able to deliver medical care and support to literally 500,000 of people who would not potentially, but most likely need some form of support and harm reduction services. And a particular point of that is that these people are talking about dependency is a huge taboo because they're angels, they're defenders, and they are such. They do not affiliate to any of the traditional harm reduction programs. The rhetoric for them is very unknown, and the places where to seek care are not available for them, especially in their smaller communities where they come from. And also, we need to understand that because of the martial law and the fact that they can travel to Europe, they should not be presenting as a threat, but they are a population who will require some support beyond Ukraine because thanks to almost literally every EU country who takes on our injured and wounded civilians and military men, they travel for health needs. They will require health services related to amputations, to polytrauma, and we need the understanding also of European doctors and harm reduction specialists and mental health specialists to work with these people because they will be coming to Europe to rejoin their families, at least for the period of their treatment and rehabilitation that they are kindly provided by EU country members. So we're very much keen to develop a further dialogue between the Ukrainian government and EU responsible authorities on how to actually facilitate that process, how we can ensure that support to harm reduction services, but also for particular new emerging groups is established, how it is funded, how it is operationalized, and how we balance the strict measures that are required in the conflict time with the human rights, with access to health, and with the future, because as you say, we're dreamers, we're dreaming about victory, and there is planning that needs to be done right now. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Victoria. I'm going to bring Lynn in now from Euro Input, just to offer some insights, if you don't mind.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, to respond to what we've been talking about already, I wanted to touch on the human rights of people who use drugs. So I think when we talk about human rights for people who use drugs, it is that we should be seen as full citizens with access to employment, access to health, access to housing, but also as part of the community. We are the community. We do need safety in the community. We are your colleagues, and we are and should be seen as stakeholders and partners in the design, delivery, and implementation in European advocacy and strategy creation. And in terms of harm reduction integration, I think that means accepting that people use drugs, that they shouldn't need to or want to stop using drugs in order to access health and harm reduction, and that integration means naloxone access, drug consumption rooms that are peer-led, peer initiatives, and again, involve people who use drugs in the design, delivery, and implementation of harm reduction services.
Very good, yeah, because, thank you. Because as far as I can see, for the most part, it's peer-informed rather than peer-led at best, so it's very important. I want to come back to Peter, actually. Peter, could you talk to us about the shrinking space for civil society in terms of everything we said about, the current political environment and the very real risk of a further far-right political environment?
Like 10 years ago, people were asking me on the corridors of such conferences that what's happening in Hungary? How can people be so stupid to vote for Orban? And now people are not asking these questions because their own countries have this same parties, and in many countries they get into power, actually. So that's now not only a phenomenon in a few countries, I think. What's happening in Hungary is a bit extreme if you compare it to other countries, like our organizations are scapegoated. Almost every week there is an article calling us like foreign agents and names like that. Maybe it's not as bad as in Russia, but it's really difficult to work as an activist anymore in Hungary. You always find, I think, in this shrinked space, you always find ways how you can move forward. For example, in Hungary, the city of Budapest provided us this window of opportunity. So the government is completely closed to any arguments. They don't speak about human rights, only in the very worst terms. but the city of Budapest has an opposition leadership, so we adopted a pro-harm reduction drug strategy in the level of Budapest, and of course it has less resources than the country, but that was a very serious breakthrough. And if we speak about shrinking space for civil society, I think we should mention that also it's happening at the European level. So I'm in the Civil Society Forum on Drugs, which is an expert group of the European Commission, and we experienced this, that there is a shrinking space also at the European level. For example, the HIV/AIDS Forum was just closed down. The CSFD has no funding to work. There was a funding opportunity for NGOs a few years ago from the DG Just drug policy grant that was abolished. And what we see is like the whole drug policy issue is slipping to the security part rather than public health and human rights part. So I think we need to fight these battles. And can I just mention one thing? What Alexis also mentioned, European drug strategy. And I think that's a very nice document on paper, and we worked in preparations of it and evaluating it. And from time to time, the evaluation said that we could not reduce the supply and demand of drugs, so that governments were pretty unsuccessful in that. But harm reduction is pretty successful, and still what we have is much less resources on harm reduction, and in many countries don't implement the EU drug strategy. So I think rather than just discussing what should be in the next EU drug strategy, we should also discuss here how we will make this strategy work. How can we make our governments more accountable? Because right now, I think it's very damaging to the whole European project if we have documents which are just on paper and nobody is taking them seriously at the country level.
Very good. I think Lynn wants to come in.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think just on a couple of points, in relation to the shrinking of civil society, I think in looking at it in an Irish context, but then how can we kind of look outward to the EU structures, to the UN, to the different drugs bodies and advocacies, because there is a disconnect, I suppose, between countries and what's happening at an international level. I grew up in an extremely, extremely poor area in Ireland, and I felt like I was from Dublin, never mind, I wouldn't even say I was from Ireland, never mind then going, oh, I'm from Europe. So some people feel their citizenship is so disconnected even from their own experience in their own country, never mind how we begin to expand that out and really feel supported by a much bigger and wider network that does exist, but the dots haven't been connected somewhat in how they all tie in together and how they all support initiatives at local and international level. And I think some of that is also down to how the civil society question and how that's been shrunk somewhat, in the sense that it's not always obvious. Like in Hungary, we can obviously see how power is being used. In some countries, it's not always as clear. So in Ireland, what we have now currently is very veiled threats around advocacy. So it's kind of like, oh, well, we fund you for service provision. We don't fund you for advocacy. But yet you're a very important service provider working with a very particular community who understand that community better than anybody else. And then there's kind of a threat, well, you're only supposed to provide services. Don't advocate on behalf of the people that you're working with. And that's kind of then leads on to, like, your funding will be threatened somewhat if you keep challenging the government that's giving you your funding. And you end up in this really toxic relationship then where you actually begin to reduce your policy work. And then who else is doing that policy work? And then there's a massive, massive vacuum. So then when you have, say, at an EU level, or you have at a UN level, or you have people coming to a country to visit it, it is those good gatekeepers are the ones that will show the outsiders around the country. It's like, I don't know whether other people had this, but when the Department of Education was coming to inspect the school and all the teachers were on their best behaviour and the kids were told to be good. That kind of happens then when international bodies come to a country like Ireland. It's like, well, who are the services that will put forward the best foot in this situation and do what they're told. And then Ireland looks really good then on an international level. And actually, we're not really paying attention to the fact that civil society, advocacy, and policy is being massively strangled, even in how we're being audited. So there's a political purposes piece in our SIPO legislation that basically is being used to say, you will lose your funding because what you're doing is political. And that could be a residents' association arguing for a particular thing, and they're being told they can't be funded because it's for political purposes. So that means any policy area of any service provision in Ireland is basically being accused of being political when they're doing advocacy work. And I think that that's a massive issue for civil society, and I think that's where the larger strategies can come into play to be able to have a really good understanding of what's happening on the ground in particular countries.
Thanks, Lynn. I just want to plug a report by Correlation European Harm Reduction Network that Peter authored, which looks at this very issue and takes a number of examples, one of them being Ireland, and takes a lot of the under-the-table issues out onto the table for the first time, meaning the things you've just described. And it's really worth a read. But I'd like to bring Vietnam back in on the discussion. Why is there no focus on drug demand and harm reduction in the EU strategy on drugs? It's very much supply and control, I think. Why would you think they didn't take the opportunity to focus in on that?
Frankly speaking, it's a difficult question.
A difficult one, right?
Very difficult one. When I, think about why, you can find a lot of reasons why. Because, look, can I repeat once again? We have 8 principles: balanced and evidence-based drug policy. Mm-hmm. Yes, balanced and evidence-based drug policy. And let's ask Ministers of Interior: do they understand balanced and evidence-based drug policy? We spent a lot of time together with Michel debating those issues in 4 countries with Ministers of Interior. Mm-hmm. And they see you as a human being from another planet, because they have no chance to understand about what we are speaking. We are arguing about evidence-based, but they have not trust in science, because trust in science now is going down. And it means we can have a lot of strategies. But when we're speaking about trust in science, we need to understand that trust in science is going down. Look, public health approach. Public health, a lot of people are using public health approach. But what does it mean, public health? It means that it is included into curricula of universities. It is included into field of Ministry of Education. It is included into field of Ministry of Finance. It is included in the field of Ministry of Social Affairs, because we are speaking about complexity. We need to have very complex measures, very complex program, and of course complex require a lot of modern management efforts. Let's see, on the papers looks nice, but in real life complexity is silo mentality is killing all of us in every ministry. Looks at decriminalization of drug use and possession of personal use. Public opinion about decriminalization so bad in my country. They thinking that you need to punish, to imprison, this. And public opinion is against such situation. We confronted very much with public opinion when we are speaking about decriminalization. Mm-hmm. And of course, only when we are finding ways to present real examples. What does it mean? Please look, it is your child, it is your family, it was your, situation, it was damage done because criminalization creates much more death, much more we killed people because we imprisoned them when we are just speaking about possibilities to decriminalize it. And of course also minimizing incarceration measures. We discuss those issues in Kazakhstan, for example, Once again, we should, and we can present, look, it is the WHO strategy, it is European Union strategy, it is evidence-based, it is standard, it is approved standard of treatment. Methadone is standard of treatment. And Minister of Interior looks into you and thinks, you are crazy a little bit, because he understands only one way: police, prison, and that's all. That's it. And elimination, and that's all. And I think we need to understand the situation that now we can do much more efforts. We can see how can we develop your conference is network. But we need to much more broader network in every country, overcoming, Orban, Iron Curtain, because they use mass media, eliminating you from possibilities to speak openly about that. In Ireland, you have no chance, no experience with Orban, but we know what does it mean. And sorry to say, but I see that now it is time to also not to speak about papers, right, but to speak about how can we overcome those challenges which are in front of us. I am optimistic. I am very big optimist. I am fighter, and I think that we need now to organize much more events at European Parliament level. Much more events at European Parliament level, much more conferences to develop network, to use social media, and of course, and also to raise those questions openly.
Very good. Excellent. Well done. We need to double down on harm reduction. Victor, you wanted to come in.
I just wanted to answer your question, basically why EU drug policy is not sufficiently balanced towards prevention, treatment, harm reduction, and why there is a lot of emphasis, and increasing emphasis, on the security and supply. If you read the preamble of EU drug strategy, it says that it's based on the basis of the EU strategy is represented by the 3 UN conventions. And then it predefine the whole strategy, because conventions simply define this prohibitive nature of what we do. Yeah. Yes. This is the basis. I mean, and it says, and the basis says, use of the substances out of medical context shouldn't be allowed. And of course, supply of the substances in this context should be punished civilly. Yeah, so we have to change this paradigm. Thank you. I will be happy, and I will see some progress in EU drug policy if I see at least once the word regulation of supply or regulation of market in the European drug policy. And it's related also to the violence. Yeah, simply, with our policies, we are creating illicit nature of the market. More we do it, more the illicit nature is here, with all the negative signs, including violence. We invest more money to create this illicit space with those consequences, and then we lose the resources creating this, and then we lose double, because I mean it creates other risks for our societies and also for our rule of law, yeah, our democratic states. Yeah? Okay. So we have to change this. We have to change this paradigm simply.
Very good, very good. Thank you. Stay with that, Victor. Just a thought. So I'm just going to move down the line, actually, Victor. I'll ask you this question, so you can expand upon it. What are the most relevant advocacy priorities for the forthcoming years? We've talked a lot, but what are the most relevant? Yep, you're going first, that's for sure. You haven't even got to put your hand up. You need to answer this first.
It will be my last intervention.
No, it's okay.
What we have done in Czech Republic and what brought kind of positive experiences, successes we now have is integration of policies of, as Alexis says, there are different phenomena in addictions, so we integrated all of them into one policy. And if you integrate alcohol, nicotine, and with nicotine there is another challenge for harm reduction, yeah? Just be aware of that, what's going on in tobacco policy. So alcohol, nicotine, different non-substance addictions, let's say, psychoactive substances, new psychoactive substances, illicit drugs, into one policy, into one frame, with one perspective, with one, I mean, some measures.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Then it gets much easier to change also the policy in illicit drugs.
Okay, so bring it all together. Okay. Lynn Jeffries, what would your advocacy priority be for the coming years?
So something I touched on earlier in terms of inclusion of people who use drugs.
Sure.
But also I think we need to look at funding for harm reduction and including that in our advocacy efforts. Community-led monitoring, so when we're talking about monitoring and researching responses to synthetic opiates, new psychoactive substances, community-led monitoring, so research that includes people who use drugs, as well as drug checking, pushing for more drug checking services and analysis. And then in terms of intersectionality, we were very lucky yesterday to have our Euro Input General Assembly, where we got feedback from our members in terms of underrepresented groups in Europe, in our network, and that would be migrants, undocumented folks, people who use drugs, trans people who use drugs, younger people, people who do sex work, people involved in the chemsex community. So those kinds of focuses, I think, are quite important.
Sure. So kind of focusing on enhanced harm reduction for minority groups and such, yeah. Thank you. Over to Victoria. Thank you.
I will have two strands where I would recommend to focus on. First of all, yesterday we had a very insightful meeting of the law enforcement leaders from different countries, and to me it once again was the reasons to remind myself and all of us is that it's not about the triad of doctor, patient, and the police within the triangle of OST or harm reduction in general, but it's indeed a broader legal enforcement, and we have the honor of having here the judge from Ukraine, the prosecutors, and the judges and the prosecutors from other countries, bringing them into actually not discussing the strategies and discussing the implementation of the law and explaining it to their professional communities and gaining more people who are advocating for the human rights, but being peers. When we talk about peer groups for people who use drugs or peer groups for veterans, we might really benefit from peers within the law enforcement who are very advanced in their understanding and implementation. The second that I want to draw attention is that Ukraine already for almost 3 years under the martial law. And when we talk about shrinking civil society space, it's not only the funding that comes to civil society or their role, and luckily European countries are not in the martial time law, but you have to understand which threats it poses to civil society, to advocacy and policy works, and to all the funding priorities that go to countries if they enter the martial time law. Lastly speaking, look at the occupied territories. It took months, it took 10 years to establish harm reduction programs in Ukraine, in Donetsk, Lugansk, and Crimea. It took literally a few months to wipe them out, to wipe out people who were related, to trace back their families, and to eliminate anything human rights related and harm reduction. And that to us speaks that it is the physical war for existence, but it's also something that we could not stop putting pressure and understand how difficult it was to achieve and how fragile it may be and how we should have our hands on permanently.
Thank you, Victoria. I'll just pick up on the subject of police and judiciary and such being involved at all with drug use. There's two schools of thought. One is that we shouldn't engage with them at all, and the other one is that we need to because of prohibition, and we need to work with them whilst we're also advocating for these changes. So there's definitely two schools, and depending on whether you're talking to people from America or Europe, there's very different perspectives. Well, I don't know why Lynn's smiling at me now, but I'll pass you over to Lynn. And advocacy priorities would be great.
Yeah, well, I suppose, like, nationally in Ireland, it would be to continue to get decriminalisation over the line and also be able to, I suppose, really build a larger movement in relation to regulation. I think we're still just getting people to the thought of decriminalising people, and the regulation conversation isn't as large and kind of as open as I would like it to be. But I also think two other things that we need to do domestically, but I would imagine is common theme in other communities as well, in other countries, is to have an actual proper class analysis in relation to how we do things. I think we've started, naming groups, like, so we say, like, migrant community or LGBT community. I mean, when actually there's a thread of a class analysis often amongst those communities who are the most impacted. And at the end of the day, we know everyone uses drugs from all classes, but it's usually those who are impacted the most who are the ones that have to carry the burden to demand change. And I don't think that that's fair. So really what I would like to see is more professionals, more academics, more politicians actually owning the fact that they use drugs and they also contribute to the illicit drugs market, because they're not getting their drugs in a chemist, they're getting them in the same place as the men who are dying at the hands of that violence, and they play a role in that too. And I think if we had more people actually admit their drug use, I think the laws would change a lot quicker.
Very good. Thanks, Lynn. Dennis, your advocacy priorities. Want to grab the mic there?
Yes, it's really interesting to follow this discussion. Maybe I would like to go back to the importance of civil society, which is reflected also in the policy paper, which I mentioned. And I quote, "Civil society participation is a prerequisite for the realization of human rights, in particular through the promotion of public awareness and securing the transparency and accountability of public authorities. This includes," and it has been mentioned before, "the right of people who use drugs and those with substance use disorder or addictive behaviors and their families, as well as people that are undergoing or have completed a treatment and recovery process and their families, to have their voices heard and their views considered in drug policy development, service delivery and evaluation, as it is stated in the motto, 'Nothing about us without us.'" So that's the paragraph on civil society, and I wanted to stress the importance of civil society. And if you allow me to go a little bit more on the philosophical side, you know probably René Descartes, the French philosopher, "Cogito ergo sum," I think, therefore I am. And the first sentence of his book, Le Discours de la Méthode, was, "Common sense is the most common of the senses." And by writing this, he showed us that he doesn't understand anything about human beings, because common sense is not common. If we would have common sense, we would have drug policy based on scientific evidence and on human rights, but we don't. Some have, more or less, but in general we don't. And why is it so? Because, as the famous historian Marc Bloch, French historian, once said, when working in the field of lies and fake news in the 20s, 100 years ago, he was working on the field of fake news. Why people believe rather in fake news than in the truth? And why? Parce que les gens croiront toujours plus un mensonge qui les arrange qu'une vérité qui les dérange. In English, because people will always trust more in a lie which arranges them than in a truth which disturbs them. And this is where we are. And this is also why the voice of civil society is so important, because they are bringing messages, idealism, and the request for truth, when this is not something where people are really comfortable with. And what is interesting is that when you have an evolution, countries become, as Alexis mentioned in the beginning, there is a backlash on democracy in a number of countries, including in European countries. And the voice of civil society becomes disturbing and less heard because they are seen as dangerous people. And the more we try to have these people, these dangerous people, speak lower, the more the world becomes dangerous. So maybe we should have more dangerous people to have a less dangerous world.
Thank you, Dennis. Great reflections, thank you. I'll bring Peter in now about advocacy priorities, please.
I agree that we live in times where we have to explain some concepts which we believe that are self-evident before, like what is civil society, why is it important, and also like not only like why harm reduction is important, but why public health is important, why human rights are important, because all these are slipping from the agenda of policymakers and the public discussion. And I think these conferences are very important. We come here to feel recharged the batteries and feel that we are not alone in our battles every day. But I challenge everybody that when you go home, just try to get out from your bubbles and explain to as many people what are these very basic concepts are. And probably this energy which the representative presented us can be the way. So may the force be with you guys.
Very good. Fitness. Would you like to say anything about advocacy priorities?
I can only say openly, let's have common energy, not common sense, but common energy to do our best and to overcome all challenges. Otherwise, we will see without energy, we have less success. I am ready. I am very young. I am now only 73 now. It would be good to see much younger around me, much more energetic, and let's change our situation. I am staying optimistic.
Very good. Excellent. Optimism. Okay. So it's almost lunchtime. We're going to stick to time because it's going to be difficult to feed 500 of you. I want to thank the panel. And for my part, I guess it's clear to me that the talk about neoliberalism and the far right asking for policies to be implemented and not seeing them implemented, knowing that the risk to our gains that Alexis mentioned over the last 30 years are threatened. It's time to double down on harm reduction. As Peter said, get out of your bubbles. When you get back, as I said at the beginning, I hope you take agency from this panel and this conference. I certainly haven't had to be on a panel before and check where the edge of the stairs, the edge was, just in case I fell off. But that was really good. Thank you all. I hope you all enjoyed it. A round of applause for the panel. And it's lunchtime next.